The American general's aide arrived at the British operations room at 21:40 and asked if they could observe the mission. The SAS squadron commander looked at him for a long moment. "Sit down," he said. "Watch how it's done." 4 hours earlier, the same American command had sent a formal liaison message suggesting the British reconsider the operation. The target was an al-Qaeda in Iraq senior facilitator operating out of a fortified compound in the Diyala province. A man their own intelligence cell had been working for 19 months, whose network had been responsible for 11 coalition fatalities, and whose personal counter-surveillance methodology had defeated 4 separate American targeting attempts in the preceding year. The American assessment was that the compound was too heavily defended for a sub-company strength operation, that the intelligence picture was insufficiently developed for a go-no-go decision, that the risk calculus did not support an unsupported direct action raid against a hardened target with an estimated 30-plus personnel. The British assessment was different. At 02:17 the mission was over. The target was in custody. 23 of the 31 compound personnel had been detained without a single British casualty. The remaining 8 had fled through an exit route the SAS had identified and sealed before the assault began. And on the table in the exploitation room, 2 hard drives, a set of encrypted mobile phones, and a contact list that the CIA station chief in Baghdad would later describe as the single most valuable intelligence haul from a single operation in the Diyala campaign. The American general's aide had watched every second of it. He did not say anything for a long time. "Then, how long were you planning this?" The SAS officer who answered him was already packing his kit. "Since Tuesday," he said. It was Friday. The facilitator designated in coalition intelligence files as Priority 1 Diyala had been on the JSOC targeting list since April 2006. By the autumn of 2007, 19 months into active pursuit, the file had grown to several hundred pages: satellite imagery, signals intelligence, human source reporting, pattern of life analysis, network mapping. It represented an extraordinary investment of intelligence resources against a single individual. The results of that investment were 4 compromised operations, 0 detentions, and a target who had demonstrated, repeatedly and consistently, an ability to detect American preparation activity and relocate before the strike element arrived. The intelligence postmortem from the 4th failed operation, conducted by a joint CIA-JSOC analytical team in September 2007, reached conclusions that were uncomfortable for the American command. The target had not been getting advance warning through intelligence leaks. He was not receiving tip-off information from inside the coalition targeting cycle. He was reading operational signatures, the specific patterns of activity that preceded an American direct action operation, and responding to them with a speed and consistency that the analytical team described as indicative of trained counter-surveillance methodology rather than opportunistic threat awareness. Translation: he had learned to read the American playbook. The signatures he was reading were not subtle. An American direct action operation against a hardened compound target in the Diyala province in 2007 required persistent ISR coverage of the target location for a minimum of 72 hours before the operation to confirm current occupancy, a pre-assault helicopter staging movement that, even when conducted at distances designed to minimize acoustic pre-warning, generated identifiable aviation activity, a signals intelligence collection surge in the target area that, while operationally necessary for force protection, produced a detectable change in the electromagnetic environment, and a communications pattern between the assault element, the command element, and the supporting ISR architecture that, even encrypted, established a temporal signature, a specific rhythm of activity in the hours before an American strike. The target had 19 months of observing these signatures. He had 19 months of moving before they materialized into an assault. He was, by the autumn of 2007, very good at this. The American recommendation, following the September analytical review, was a strategic pause, a period of reduced operational activity against the target to allow the intelligence picture to further develop, the target's pattern of life to restabilize, and a new operational approach to be designed around his counter-surveillance methodology. The British Special Forces Command reviewed the same intelligence package. They reached a different conclusion. The British assessment of the Diyala facilitator was built on a methodology that differed from the American model in a fundamental, and from the American perspective, almost reckless way. The Americans had spent 19 months trying to build a perfect targeting picture before committing forces. The British spent 3 days building a good enough picture to commit people who could handle what they found when they got there. This distinction between the pursuit of certainty before commitment and the acceptance of calibrated uncertainty managed by individual operator capability is the philosophical core of the difference between the two approaches. It is not that the British were cavalier about intelligence preparation. The 3-day planning cycle that preceded the Diyala operation was intense, meticulous, and analytically rigorous. It simply operated from a different premise, that the 19-month American intelligence package, for all its comprehensiveness, had produced a target who knew exactly what a fully prepared American operation looked like and had 19 months of practice evading it. What the target had not had practice evading was an operation that did not look like anything he had seen before. The British planning process began on Tuesday morning with a full review of the American intelligence package. The SAS intelligence officer and the troop commanders spent 6 hours reading everything the American system had produced about the target, not because they were going to replicate the American approach, but because 19 months of comprehensive intelligence collection, even when it had failed to produce a successful operation, contained an extraordinary amount of information about the target's habits, his network, his compound, and critically, his counter-surveillance methodology. The counter-surveillance methodology was the starting point. The target moved when he detected American preparation signatures. The British approach was to generate none of those signatures, no persistent ISR tasking against the target location, no signals intelligence collection surge in the target area, no aviation staging movements in the 48 hours before the operation, no communications architecture involving the full command chain in the target area. What there was instead, a 2-man SAS Rex team that inserted into the Diyala district on Wednesday night, on foot, in civilian clothing, carrying nothing that identified them as military personnel. They established an observation position within visual range of the compound. They spent 36 hours watching. They used binoculars and a notebook. They communicated via a single encrypted radio on a prearranged schedule that produced a transmission pattern of less than 90 seconds per 12-hour window, insufficient to establish the kind of temporal signature the target had learned to read. What they saw over 36 hours, compound layout confirmed against the American satellite imagery with corrections for a new outer wall section not visible from altitude. Personnel count, 31, with a rotation schedule suggesting a maximum of 19 personnel inside the compound at any given time between 02:00 and 04:00 local. Guard positions, 4, with a handover pattern that created a 90-second window at the northeast corner of the compound during the 02:00 guard rotation. Exits, 3 confirmed, 1 probable, a vehicle gate on the eastern wall that was chained but not padlocked from the outside. On Thursday afternoon, the Rex team transmitted their package. On Friday morning, the assault troop was briefed. On Friday evening, the American liaison received a courtesy notification that an operation was planned for that night. On Friday evening, the American command sent its message recommending reconsideration. On Friday evening, the SAS squadron commander invited the American general's aide to sit down and watch. The assault troop departed their forward location at 23:30 in vehicles that had been running regular movement patterns through the Diyala district for 4 days, not for surveillance purposes, but specifically to establish vehicle movement as a normal environmental feature that the compound's counter-surveillance watchers would have categorized as routine before the operation night. This is a detail that the American planning cycle had no structural mechanism to produce. An American direct action operation is planned against a target. The pre-operation vehicle movement that normalizes a vehicle pattern in the target area, begun 4 days before the operation is formally planned, requires a planning process that begins before the decision to conduct the operation, which requires a doctrinal flexibility about what constitutes operational preparation that the American system, with its formal approval gates and documented risk acceptance requirements, was not built to accommodate. The British were not operating under the same approval architecture. The assault troop debussed 800 meters from the compound at 01:40, moving on foot through agricultural terrain that the Rex team had mapped. They split into 3 elements: the breach and assault group, the cut-off group covering the 3 confirmed exits, and a 3-man element positioned at the probable vehicle gate on the eastern wall, chained but not padlocked, who had specific instructions about what to do if personnel attempted to use it. At 02:00, the Northeast Guard rotation began. At 02:01, during the 90-second window the Rex team had identified, the breach element was through the compound wall. What followed was 11 minutes of controlled, sequential compound clearance, the product of the close-quarter battle training that 22 SAS conducts at the Killing House in Hereford to a standard that requires an operator to have fired several thousand live rounds in CQB scenarios before being considered proficient, and that the regiment sustains through continuous annual live fire training across the entire operational career of every operator in the squadron. The target was identified in the third room cleared, not in the compound's main structure, where the American intelligence package had assessed him most likely to be located, but in a secondary building in the compound's interior courtyard. He was detained without resistance. The simultaneous clearance of the primary structure produced 17 additional detainees. The cut-off groups at the 3 exits collected a further 6 personnel who had attempted to leave during the initial breach confusion. Total detention time from breach to compound secure, 11 minutes. The 8 personnel who reached the vehicle gate on the eastern wall found the 3-man element waiting. They were added to the detention count. The American general's aide, watching the live feed from the overhead platform the British had tasked for the operation, not for surveillance of the target, which would have generated a detectable ISR signature in the pre-operation period, but for force protection and intelligence exploitation documentation during and after the assault, later described the 11-minute compound clearance as the most technically precise direct action operation he had observed in 3 years of working alongside Special Operations Forces in Iraq. "It looked slow," he said. "Everything looked unhurried, and then it was done." He had seen American direct action operations that took 30, 40, 50 minutes to clear a compound of this size and complexity. "I asked how they make it look slow," he said. "The answer I got was, because they've done it 10,000 times." The intelligence exploitation phase of a successful SAS direct action operation is, in some respects, more carefully planned than the assault itself. This is a philosophical position that not all special operations forces share. The American direct action model, in its pure form, is optimized for the kinetic phase, the assault, the detention, the extraction. The exploitation of what is found at the target site is a follow-on activity, conducted by intelligence personnel who arrive after the assault element has secured the compound. The SAS model treats exploitation as integral to the operation, not sequential to it. Every operator in the assault troop had been briefed on the specific intelligence exploitation priorities for the Diyala operation. They knew what they were looking for. They knew how to handle it, what to touch, how to photograph it in situ before moving it, how to ensure continuity of evidence for subsequent analytical and legal processing. They knew the priority items: electronic devices first, then written materials, then personal effects that might contain contact information. The target had brought 3 laptops to the secondary building where he was detained. He had a mobile phone that had never been registered to any SIM card tracked by the American SIGINT architecture, a device that had been invisible to signals intelligence for its entire operational life. And he had, in a waterproof bag secured to his body, a paper document that contained the most complete record of the AQI financial facilitation network in the Diyala, Kirkuk, and Salahuddin provinces that any coalition intelligence cell had ever held. The paper document was the key. The American Signals Intelligence Architecture, the NSA capabilities, the persistent intercept operations, the network mapping built from electronic surveillance, had been unable to fully map the financial facilitation network because the network had been deliberately designed to operate with minimal electronic signature. The facilitator had understood, with the same forensic attention to American methodology that had allowed him to evade 4 targeting operations, that the American intelligence system was optimized for signals collection. He had built a parallel network that operated through face-to-face contact, physical cash transfers, and paper documentation. The paper document was that network, written in his own handwriting, with names, locations, transfer amounts, and dates. The CIA station chief in Baghdad received the initial exploitation report at 06:30 on Saturday morning. He later told colleagues it was the intelligence hall of the Diyala campaign. The network mapped in the document supported coalition operations across 3 provinces for the following 4 months. The individuals named in it, 47 separate entries, were systematically targeted through a combination of American and British Special Forces operations over that period. All 47 were detained or confirmed killed within 90 days. The operation that produced this result had been planned in 3 days. Without a persistent ISR package, without a signals intelligence collection surge, without the 72-hour pre-operation surveillance that American doctrine required, without any of the preparation architecture that the target had spent 19 months learning to read. It had been planned in 3 days because the British approach was not built around the acquisition of certainty before commitment. It was built around the confidence that the operators being committed could handle whatever they found. The American general who received the after-action report on the Diyala operation asked a question at the formal debrief that cut to the philosophical core of what had happened. What did 3 days give you that 19 months didn't give us? The SAS squadron commander's answer was careful and precise. 3 days gave us an approach he hadn't seen. 19 months gave him 19 months of practice avoiding your approach. The answer illuminates something that military planning processes struggle to acknowledge. That intelligence collection, at sufficient duration and scale, can inform the target as much as it informs the collector, not through leaks or compromised sources, but through operational signature. Every ISR tasking that generates overhead activity near a target location is observable by anyone who has learned to look for it. Every signals intelligence surge that changes the electromagnetic environment around a target area is detectable to anyone who knows what the baseline looks like. Every pre-operation helicopter staging movement that occurs within acoustic range of a target is heard. The target had not needed a source inside the American intelligence cycle. He had needed 19 months of watching the signatures that the American intelligence cycle produced, and the analytical capacity to understand what those signatures predicted. The British three-day approach had generated none of those signatures, not because it was less capable of generating them, because it had been specifically designed, based on a clear-eyed reading of the American intelligence package, to avoid producing the signatures the target had learned to read. This required something the American system's approval architecture made structurally difficult: the willingness to commit operators against a target with an imperfect intelligence picture, on the basis that the operator's individual capability could compensate for intelligence uncertainty in ways that no additional preparation time could match. The Rex team's 36-hour observation had provided a level of ground truth detail that 19 months of satellite imagery and signals intelligence had not been able to produce. Because ground truth requires proximity, and proximity requires operators capable of maintaining it in conditions that the target's counter-surveillance methodology was designed to detect and defeat. The Rex team had not been detected. Not because they were invisible, no human beings are invisible, but because they had been specifically selected and trained for the ability to remain in close target proximity for extended periods without generating the behavioral signatures that counter-surveillance looks for. The ability to move without the gait of a military operator. The ability to remain completely still for hours at a time in positions that every physical instinct argues against. The ability to observe without the specific attentiveness that distinguishes a watching person from an environment. These are not skills that can be taught in a training program and certified against an objective standard. They are qualities discovered on a Welsh mountain in January by a selection process that has been finding them in specific human beings since 1941. The assault troops' 11-minute compound clearance, the sequence that the American aide had described as looking slow and unhurried, was the product of the same institutional investment. Operators who had conducted CQB training to a standard that allowed them to move through a building with the economy of professionals so practiced in their methodology that it had ceased to require conscious attention. Who could make decisions at the point of contact, decisions about threat assessment, about room sequencing, about the management of 31 personnel in a compound clearing at 0200 local, without reference to a command architecture that was not present to make those decisions for them. The American model, built on the premise that the command architecture would be present and the intelligence picture would be complete, had produced operators whose individual capability was calibrated to those conditions. The British model, built on the premise that neither the command architecture nor the complete intelligence picture could be guaranteed, had produced operators whose individual capability was calibrated to their absence. In Diyala, on a Friday night, those operators had walked through a compound wall during a 90-second guard rotation, cleared 31 personnel in 11 minutes, and produced the most valuable single intelligence haul of the Diyala campaign. In 3 days, while the American command was recommending reconsideration. The American general's aide submitted a personal assessment report to his commanding general on his return to Bagram. The report was informal, the kind of document that circulates within institutional chains of command without becoming part of the formal record. But its conclusions were reported by 2 separate journalists with access to individuals who had read it, and its substance was consistent with the broader institutional assessment of British Special Forces performance in Iraq that emerged through congressional oversight reviews and partially declassified after-action analysis over the following years. The aide's central conclusion was simple. He had spent 3 years working alongside Special Operations Forces, American, British, and coalition, in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had seen extraordinary operations conducted by Delta Force, by SEAL Team 6, by the Australian SASR, by Polish GROM. He had seen what the best special operations forces in the world could do when they had the time, the intelligence, and the resource envelope to prepare correctly. What he had seen on Friday night in Diyala was something different. Not better in any absolute sense. Different in a specific and operationally significant way. The British operators had conducted an operation against a target who had specifically adapted to defeat American methodology, using an approach that the target had no framework to anticipate, with a planning cycle of 3 days, and produced a result that 19 months of American effort had not achieved. The operational conclusion he drew was institutional rather than personal. It was not that American Special Operations Forces were inferior. It was that the American model, with its approval architecture, its intelligence certainty requirements, its ISR dependency, its pre-operation preparation standards, had created a detectable and predictable signature that a sophisticated adversary could adapt to defeat. And that the British model, with its individual operator as the irreducible unit of capability, its tolerance for intelligence uncertainty managed by individual judgment, its ability to commit against a hardened target on 3 days of planning without the full American preparation architecture, had produced operators who generated a different signature. Or, in the Diyala case, almost no signature at all. "They sat me down," he wrote in the assessment, "and I watched how it's done. I am still not entirely sure I understand how." That honest admission, from a professional who had seen more special operations than most people who write about them, is the most accurate single observation about what distinguishes the SAS model from the systems it operates alongside. The how is not a technique. It is not a procedure. It is not a doctrine that can be replicated by changing an approval gate or revising a pre-operation checklist. It begins on a Welsh mountain in January. It begins with a man moving alone across a high-exposed ridge with 25 kilograms on his back and a checkpoint time he has not been told. It begins with the specific discovery the mountain makes available about what a person is made of when the last rational argument for stopping has been made and rejected. The men who find the right answer to that question are the men who, 3, 5, 8 years later, breach a compound wall in Diyala during a 90-second guard rotation and clear 31 personnel in 11 minutes, and come out with the intelligence haul that 19 months of American effort could not produce. Not because of better technology. Not because of better intelligence. Because a squadron commander told an American aide to sit down and watch how it's done, and then sent in men who already knew.